Stop staring at it like it owes you something, Das. The words came from Council Guard Yarn, a gruff Torgian who'd stood watch outside the Galactic Senate Hall longer than most species had achieved atmospheric flight. He didn't glance up from his station, just shifted his stance with the weight of someone tired of watching diplomats gawk at the same damn chair. I tore my gaze away. The Earth seat, carved from obsidian with no crest or national sigil, sat like a question mark carved in stone. Always present, never filled. A sentinel of silence in a chamber designed for noise. "Just observing," I muttered, adjusting the bronze clasps on my conquered envoy robe. They chafed under the collar, a ceremonial irritation for a job steeped in uncomfortable truths. "Been observing 30 years, Yarn grumbled. "It hasn't blinked yet." The chamber's vaulted crystal ceiling shimmered in a slow aurora, a kaleidoscope of system light bouncing off the badges of 1,000 delegates. But the Earth seat cast no reflection. I noticed it every time, like it absorbed illumination just enough to remain defined, but never noticed. "Envoy Das," came a voice smoother than static, but firm enough to carry intent. Council leader Strahl Coven stood at the entrance to the inner quorum, tall and pale blue-skinned, his breath visible in the chilled corridor. The air always ran colder near the conquered chamber, some say to keep the politics from overheating. A foolish metaphor. Nothing about conquered politics ever generated heat. I straightened instinctively. "Sir," he gestured me closer without fanfare. "We've received a reply from Earth." My throat tightened. "They responded?" "In their way," he said dryly. "Encrypted. Minimal. One line. Authorization. Granted for Tier 4 briefing. In person only. Escort to be arranged." I frowned. "Tier 4? That's military clearance." "Correct." Coven studied me, his translucent eyes unreadable. "They'll only speak to you, Vecron." There was weight in his words, the kind of weight that drags titles into graves. I nodded once. "When?" "Now. A transport awaits in orbit. You're expected." He left without another word. No debrief, no protocol chain. That, more than anything, disturbed me. I turned back toward the Earth seat. It remained motionless. My reflection in the floor warped slightly as I moved past it. Was that the alloy, or something else? The air smelled different near it, not chemical or mechanical, more like dry static clinging to skin before a storm no one else believed in, a beacon disguised as an absence. You never refused the seat, I thought. You left it empty on purpose. 30 minutes later, I sat aboard the Senate's diplomatic courier, Falcon Verge. Its control panels dimmed, its windows shuttered. The pilot wasn't listed. The ship had no markings. The cabin held no conversational features, just me, and the occasional flicker of status lights crawling across the curved bulkhead like fireflies buried in ice. Outside, the black ink of Jovian space churned with magnetic storms. The destination, Jupiter's magnetosphere, one of the most unstable spatial regions in the system. No one went there without shields and a death wish, which made the next sight all the more jarring. The Verge dipped, and through a reinforced viewport I saw something shift in the swirling fields. Not a ship, but a station. Dark, still, impossible. No registration pings, no thermal emissions. Just there, anchored in the storm, like a cathedral buried in chaos. The boarding corridor extended before contact. No docking protocol, no clearance demanded. A soft tone indicated pressure equalization. The door opened, and Ambassador Ulrich Thorne stood on the other side. I'd seen his image, filed reports, second-hand transcripts. He never spoke in the Senate, never sent messages, always just present. But here, he looked different. Short-cropped hair streaked with gray, uniform sharp but unadorned, and eyes like old glass, clear but weathered by everything they'd seen. "Welcome to Echo Vault 9, he said, stepping aside. No small talk, no delay. The interior was Spartan, matte black walls embedded with sensor webs. The floor felt magnetized. Each step stuck with a weight that told me this station wasn't built for ceremony. We walked in silence past sealed bays labeled with cryptic numbers. Aegis 3, Cold Star, Nightingale Array. Human naming conventions always walk the line between poetic and predatory. Finally, Thorne stopped at a curved doorway flanked by iris locks. The lights around them flickered, reading me, scanning for biometric inconsistencies. The door opened. Inside was a room shaped like a hemisphere, surfaces covered in soft-lit panels, raised platforms, and a central circular holotable made from laser plasma lines that shifted mid-air in thin, vertical slices. The table flickered to life. A simulation appeared, Senate sectors mapped in real time. Tiny markers swirled around distant territories, blue for patrols, red for hostile encounters, green for Earth. But not on Earth's borders. They were everywhere. Satellites anchored above major Concord worlds, orbital scramblers rotating in low-power standby above neutral stations, drones embedded behind asteroid belts, triangulating movements that had never made it into official Senate logs. "You've been tracking us," I said, trying not to sound accusatory. "No," Thorne replied calmly. "We've been protecting you." I stared at him. He tapped the display. A cluster of red signals flashed, disappeared in one frame. No explosion. No contact. "Void Collective Scouts," he said. "Intercepted. Silently." "Why not notify the Senate?" "We did, repeatedly. You filed them as sensor anomalies." The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but the cold settled deeper into my spine. "You can't just deploy around sovereign worlds without clearance?" "We never asked for clearance," Thorne replied. "We asked ourselves what happens when no one else acts." Another flick of his hand. Intercepted comms from the edge sectors, alien dialects deciphered, coordinates marked, contingency plans drafted, before the words had even reached Senate relay buoys. "We've been listening," he said. "Preparing. Drilling." A sub-panel displayed massive chambers with units in simulated combat, counter-invasion teams, real-time drills, reaction timers measured in sub-second flashes. "You trained for a war we don't believe exists." "No," he said, his tone now devoid of warmth. "We trained for one you wouldn't see coming." The simulation zoomed in on a star system blinking yellow. "That's a conquered agricultural hub," I said. "Why's it flagged?" Thorne turned to me. "Because the Void Collective is already en route." I felt my pulse thud against my temples. He stepped closer, gaze even. "The only reason you haven't been breached yet is because we've been standing in the way." I swallowed. "Why tell me now?" "Because Senator Velen asked the question out loud," Thorne said. "And once that happens, silence becomes strategy's enemy." His words held no bravado, no arrogance, only inevitability. He walked past me toward the doorway, paused, then turned. The seat wasn't left empty out of neglect. It was placed there intentionally, a signal, one no one ever decoded. I looked at the display again. Earth's silent network of watchpoints spread like a web woven in shadow, glinting just beneath visibility. "Are you telling me," I whispered, "that Earth was never waiting to be invited in?" Thorne nodded once. "We were waiting to be necessary." Behind me, the table dimmed. Outside the station, Jupiter's storms raged unseen. The message had been there all along. We just didn't know how to read it. Part 2. Echoes Below. Jupiter. The lift dropped faster than I liked. Not in a way that triggered fear, more in a way that whispered things were accelerating whether I was ready or not. The chamber thrummed beneath my boots, the sort of deep structural vibration that told you it was held in place not by gravity, but by intent. Ambassador Thorne stood beside me, saying nothing. I'd asked 4 questions on the way to this platform. He'd answered none. Now, as we descended through a vertical shaft encased in what appeared to be hardened crystal and reactive shielding, I chose silence. Not out of respect, but because the silence had begun to speak louder than I could. The lift hissed to a halt. A rectangular corridor stretched ahead, curved slightly, its surfaces dull and seamless. No lighting strips, just ambient glow from embedded panels. No signage either. Echo Vault 9 didn't advertise where you were or where you were going. You knew, or you didn't belong here. Thorne moved forward. I followed, the air drier now, recycled so long it carried no trace of where it came from. It felt deliberately blank, like everything else here, as if emotion had been sandblasted out of the walls. "Why here?" I asked finally. "Why Jupiter?" "It hides what others can't explain," he replied. "The magnetosphere scrambles long-range detection and masks unnatural gravity signatures. The storms do the rest." I frowned. "We've scanned this region dozens of times. There's nothing in the records." He gave a small shrug. "That's the point." We reached a sealed pressure gate. A sensor in the ceiling blinked once, then opened with a smooth rotation. Inside, the atmosphere changed. There was no ceremony, no guards, just movement, a quiet machinery of purpose. Humans moved between console bays, gesturing at floating laser plasma schematics. Some wore uniform variants I didn't recognize, dark with insignias absent. A few glanced up as we passed, offering nods, but not curiosity. I wasn't unexpected. I was simply next. Thorne stopped at a central ringed platform with a perimeter of heads-up displays orbiting a matte black table. 3 projectors blinked to life, forming intersecting layers of real-time data, fleet positions, system densities, migration routes. Patterns overlaid patterns until the complexity formed a kind of elegant chaos. From the side, a man approached, thick build, buzzed scalp, coat half open, and a datapad tucked under one arm. "Director Marin Kess," Thorne said, gesturing briefly. "He oversees operations across all outer watch points." Kess offered me a short nod. "You're the Concord envoy?" "Vecron Das." "Long trip, let's get to it." No welcome, no protocol brief. Just a flick of his wrist, and the central display refocused. What unfolded was staggering. A map of conquered space, color-coded, with blinking motion vectors across 5 sectors. Blue tagged active patrols. Yellow meant Senate-approved defense grids. Red denoted known threats. And green? Green was Earth. I saw the first one near the Varan corridor, an unmanned stealth drone rotating through a low orbit around a Senate medical station. Another hidden within the debris belt of a non-inhabited world near Hesk Prime. 12 more in the Salaran Drift. Their range formed a lattice of overlapping surveillance, almost artistic, in coverage. "These are covert placements," I said, jaw tightening. "Why deploy assets around conquered systems without consent?" "We're not the ones who failed to secure them," Kess replied, deadpan. "We just filled in the gaps." He tapped a new quadrant. This time, red pulses emerged across Senate edge territories. Void collective movement, not theoretical, not misinterpreted energy readings. Ships, biological signal traces, adaptive routing. They've been probing for 5 years. 5, I started. "That's impossible. We've had no confirmed sightings." "Because you didn't know what to look for," Kess said. "They're quiet, they don't communicate, and they don't repeat tactics. One failed route, they don't return. They map, adjust, and disappear. So we watch for shadows, not movements." I turned to Thorne. "You've been intercepting them?" He nodded. Silently. Our black flag units only intervene when their paths intersect planetary approach vectors. The screen played a simulation of an orbital maneuver. A single red marker skated across a star system. Before it reached the outer moons, 5 green dots intersected its path. The red disappeared. No explosion, no flare, just gone. "What did you do?" I asked. Thorne didn't answer. Another panel lit up, showing a timeline of drills and deployments. Conflict scenarios ran continuously, even while Earth remained diplomatically silent. There were drills labeled Shield Eclipse, Iron Vow, and one called Ashfall Pattern Delta, each modeled after a different alien incursion style, including ours. "You've simulated a conquered assault?" "Multiple times," Kess said. "Every Senate fleet's standard formations, strategic delays, and chain of command protocols are mapped. We know how fast you retreat, how quickly your councils escalate, and how long your supply lines hold under duress." My pulse quickened. "That's invasion planning." "That's survival modeling," Thorne corrected. "We learned early that hoping for peace doesn't build it." "And what if the Senate saw this as hostile?" He raised an eyebrow. "You don't. You're still here." I stared at the map. A world appeared near the rim, unmarked. Then a small string of alerts fired. Biological interference, gravitational distortion, communication loss. No military assets, no Senate reaction. I didn't recognize the planet. Neither did Kess, apparently. "That's new," he muttered. "Mark it." The system dimmed and the region was cued into real-time monitoring. No order needed, no debate, just response. Vecron Das, conquered envoy, observer of 1,000 debates, suddenly felt like he'd stepped into something closer to instinct than governance. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why show me this?" Thorne answered without turning. "Because your people finally asked the right question." He paused, then added, "And because our calculations say you have 6 weeks before the first breach becomes undeniable." The lights dimmed across the bay as an alert passed through the station. Not a siren, not panic, just a quiet ripple of movement, as if everyone had been waiting for a specific timestamp. "Another fleet's gone dark," Kess said. "Void collective pattern confirmed. 3rd disappearance this quarter." I struggled for breath. "Why didn't you tell us this sooner?" Thorne looked at me, not with anger, not even with disappointment, just clarity. "Because you weren't ready to hear what we knew, and we weren't ready to be ignored." And in that moment I understood something I hadn't before, not intellectually, but in the bone-deep way that alters how you see the stars. Earth didn't withhold arrogance. They withheld because they already knew what came next. And now I did too. The data logs were still spinning behind my eyes when I stepped back into the Senate hall. From the obsidian hush of Echo Vault 9 to this brightly lit theater of protocol, the contrast scraped my nerves raw. Where Earth's silence meant movement, the Senate's noise disguised inertia. I didn't have time to reacclimate. "Envoy Das," came the clipped voice of Council Chair Vorian Lex. "You returned quickly." "I had to," I said, stepping into the quorum chamber. "You need to see something." He raised a brow. "We've already had one crisis briefing this cycle. I doubt the chamber has appetite for another." Across the rows, ornate robes rustled as representatives took their seats, voices folding over each other like a tidal wash of indecision. The Earth seat remained unoccupied, same as ever, except now it loomed in my peripheral like a silent beacon I could no longer unsee. Before I could speak, Representative Gur Talvek of the Kalandari Trium rose. His voice had the rhythm of polished arrogance, like he'd practiced disagreeing with facts until it became an art form. "We mustn't allow ourselves to be baited by speculation," he declared. "Gravitational anomalies do not equate to invasion. The last time we jumped to conclusions, we nearly militarized a refugee convoy." A few nods followed. Others looked uneasy, but unwilling to challenge him openly. Typical. Talvek continued. "Let us remember that Earth declined participation for centuries, and now we're expected to elevate them as protectors based on encrypted whispers and shadow fleets. Their absence should be seen for what it is: calculated disengagement." I stepped forward, ignoring the protocol beacons blinking politely for permission to speak. With respect, Representative, I've seen what you haven't. Talvek didn't sit. Then perhaps you've seen illusions. Earth is many things, but transparent is not one of them. They act without oversight, operate without counsel, and now they seek to frighten us into dependency. No, I said flatly. They don't want us dependent. They want us aware. Lex shifted slightly in his moderator seat, watching me with the quiet tension of a man choosing between diplomacy and panic. I transmitted the Tier 4 encrypted logs directly to his console, footage of the intercepts, the simulations, and the latest pattern overlays Earth had tracked without Senate knowledge. His eyes scanned the data, pupil movement syncing to each red signature that vanished without explanation. You saw this firsthand? He asked softer now. Yes, and it's not isolated. Then why haven't we heard from Earth directly? I glanced at the Earth seat. Because they never intended to speak to all of us. They only speak to those who ask the right questions. Vorian leaned back slowly. I'll review your data in full. In the meantime, the chamber will be informed of the motion. Quietly. I nodded, barely resisting the urge to look at Talvek. I didn't need to. His silence said enough. Inside Echo Vault 9, the command ring pulsed with color-coded data swirls. The room had the scent of sterile carbon, like glass touched by static, stripped of anything unnecessary. No background chatter, no ambient noise. Every click and movement fed into purpose. Tech Officer Bran Evor was already at his station when the new alert flared across his heads-up display. Something's off, he muttered, his voice clipped but alert. Kess stepped over. Define off. Evor rotated the spatial model and layered in gravitational data across the border sectors. We've been watching static anomalies around Threx 9 for weeks. This one's different. It's moving, slowly, intentionally, like it's testing where the alarms go off. Void Collective? Can't confirm yet, but the frequency modulation is almost rhythmic. The station's central display spun to life, layering subtle fluctuations in solar drift, relay silence, and comm channel scattering. It wasn't a signature, it was choreography. Kess frowned. They're not probing? No, Brand said, voice hollow now. They're aligning. He tapped his console and triggered the Obsidian directive. Across multiple sectors, Earth's black flag fleets received silent orders. No lights, no declarations, just new vectors uploaded. Cloaked ships slid from asteroid shadows. Stationary defense grids powered into active rotation. There was no fanfare. Earth didn't posture. It simply shifted. The Senate, meanwhile, continued to rehearse panic in slow motion. A minor systems relay on the Goran loop blinked offline. The sensor data, incomplete and corrupted, fed into the central chamber's discussion feed. Likely solar interference, a committee lead announced. Could be a delayed telemetry echo, another speculated. No one mentioned the obvious, until the second world vanished. Veltran, a research colony on the edge of Senate space, went dark. Not evacuated, not destroyed. Gone. No outbound distress, no debris, no escape pods. Just a blank entry where there had once been infrastructure, communication, and 10,000 lives. Lex stared at the report on his console, unmoving. What does your contact say now, Das? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Because I didn't need to speak. Every laser plasma display in the chamber flickered. Not a glitch. A deliberate signal, code verified, priority channel override. 4 words appeared on every screen. Observe, record. Do not interfere. Unsigned, but every delegate knew who sent it. A new data feed followed, tracking satellite intercepts, fleet movements, and void-aligned vectors plotted before the breach. It was everything we'd failed to see, modeled perfectly. Some gasped, others scoffed. Talvek stood, face pale, his earlier confidence now edged with uncertainty. This isn't protocol. It's coercion. It's survival, Lex said quietly. The lights dimmed. Another world went quiet. This time, no one tried to explain it away. The second world had gone dark. Not quiet, not jammed, erased. And still, the Senate debated. We must not rush toward escalation without procedural clarity, Representative Gortalvek insisted. One arm raised, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a paper-thin blade pretending to be a sword. The chamber lights flickered back to full brightness, but no one looked reassured. Around us, the curved tiers of the assembly glittered under dome light, an architectural marvel designed to feel safe. Today, it felt like a polished coffin. Council leader Stralkoven stood at the center dais, fingers locked behind his back. His expression was carved from that same stillness I'd seen on Thorn, only Koven wore it, like a man trying to will peace back into existence through discipline alone. The vote has been submitted for emergency mobilization under Concord Charter Article 17, Koven announced. A 3/4 majority is required. Voting opens now. Across the chamber, heads dipped. Delegates activated their vote keys. The room lit with a wave of colored pulses across the embedded rails. Blue for aye, amber for abstain, crimson for no. A cascade of blues flowed through the lower ring. Then more. Then... Objection! Talvek snapped, rising to full height. Article 17 cannot be invoked without the ratification of Section 11B. We've yet to satisfy quorum on protocol declassification. A hush, then groans, not because he was wrong, because he was right, and everyone hated him for it. Koven's jaw tightened. Objection noted. And just like that, the vote froze mid-tally. One clause, one line of text, one delay. I turned sharply toward Talvek. You're stalling. I'm preserving order, he replied. If we abandon process now, what separates us from chaos? I wanted to answer, but every version of the response ended in shouting. Instead, I left. Outside the chamber, I pulled Council Chair Vorian Lex into a side corridor flanked by inactive display columns and a single kinetic plant embedded in the floor. Its silver leaves shimmered with gentle motion. Unaware, it would likely be dust in a week. He stared at me expectantly. Well? I uploaded the partial Tier 4 brief from Earth's vault to his heads-up panel. The laser lines flickered once, then unfolded. This wasn't a simulation, it was history. Real-time logs, footage, communications from now-extinct monitoring stations. The slow but unmistakable drift of void collective advance patterns, stitched together by human systems watching while we wasted years in debate. They're not preparing to attack, I said. They're already moving. Vorian scanned through the visuals, silhouettes of unknown vessels gliding past relay posts, blinking out from long-range scans as if reacting to being watched. No exhaust trails, no signals, just motion without origin. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, why hide this? Earth was never hiding from us, I said. A new voice echoed from behind. They were hiding us from what they'd seen.
They were hiding us from what they'd seen. The corridor doors hissed open without warning. No clearance, no announcement. Ambassador Alric Thorn stepped into the Senate's inner sanctum like he'd simply forgotten something. Vorian's eyes narrowed. You're not authorized to enter this level without... I didn't ask for permission, Thorn replied, tone soft. You asked for answers. You just didn't expect them to walk in. I stepped back. He didn't walk like a diplomat. He walked like someone who knew where every blind spot was and no longer cared who noticed. You've made preparations without alliance, Vorian said, keeping his voice level. Thorn stopped a meter from him. We mapped your weaknesses so others wouldn't. The choice to involve you was delayed because you treat risk as rumor and threat as theory. And now? Vorian asked. Thorn's gaze held steady. Now you're running out of time to catch up. Far above them inside Echo Vault 9, Tech Officer Bran Everar stood rigid at his interface. He didn't blink as the new alert bloomed across his display, a pulse in gravitational lensing near the Kareth sector. It had the shape of fleet mass, but the signature was incoherent, each ship reading as 3 places at once, never stable. Director Maron Kess stepped beside him. Static ghosting? Brand shook his head. 2-layered. This is coordinated. The lens folded outward, symbols updated. The mass coalesced, void collective confirmed. No explosion, no countdown, just contact without warning. Kess tapped a sequence into his neural band. Initiate protocol Obsidian. Across Earth's hidden network, the order spread. Black flag ships detached from their stations like threads pulling loose from a curtain. They moved with the grace of something long practiced, not scrambled. No trails, no declarations, just activation. 1 sector away inside the forward battle frame, Sable Finch, Commander Drace Halfin reviewed his sealed orders. The console shimmered with plasma-thin overlays, vector charts, energy signatures, zone shifts. His crew stood silent around him. No one asked what came next. The message ended with 1 line, not attributed to any leader or faction, just a neutral system code tagged with Earth's command flag. Do not wait for the Senate. Move to intercept. Move to intercept. Halfin closed the feed, and without a word he gave the order. The ship banked into burn, silent as it vanished into slipspace. The war had already started. The Senate just hadn't noticed yet. The breach didn't arrive with alarms. It came as silence. One by one, the outer relay buoys along the Drelos expanse stopped transmitting, not jammed, not corrupted, just gone, as if the signal had been pulled through a hole that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Inside the Senate chamber, the shift was immediate. Delegates stopped posturing mid-sentence. A few stared at their personal heads-up displays, blinking slowly as notifications trickled in. Others murmured to aides or checked their tablets for system diagnostics. And then came the first emergency ping from Felon Arc, a transit hub orbiting a resource moon. Unsolicited, unfiltered, undeniable. Multiple unidentified vessels, distortions in orbital integrity, fleet dissolving, civilian containment failing, requesting immediate assistance. The laser plasma display at the heart of the chamber exploded into motion. Tracking flares, redirect loops, sensor decay spirals. Systems went red, then darker. The Void Collective had arrived. Council Chair Vorian Lex stood slowly, adjusting his robes like a man about to step into a wind tunnel. I call an emergency session. Immediate vote to suspend protocol barriers and authorize planetary mobilization. The call barely landed before the noise took over. Dozens of representatives speaking at once, arguments, counter-motions, procedural objections. Somewhere in the gallery, Talvek was already citing Article 12. I stood still, watching as the Galactic Senate, the greatest diplomatic body ever assembled, forgot how to make a decision. Chair Lex, I called out. We've known this was coming. Earth. Envoy Das, Talvek snapped, cutting in, has made his position clear. What he offers is anecdotal. Earth is unaccountable, unsanctioned, and saving us anyway, I said. That shut him up, because while they bickered, the heads-up displays updated again. This time something new, planetary defense activations in systems that didn't have defense grids. Felon Arc didn't fall, not because the Senate responded, because Earth's hidden satellites lit up above the station like flares from a forgotten god. Automated kinetic interceptors sliced incoming trajectories. Civilian stations deployed shielding they hadn't known was installed. Transport corridors opened, routes no Senate beacon had cleared. Where is this authorization coming from? Counselor Dren barked, scrolling his feed. That station never reported Earth affiliation. Vorian looked at me, but I didn't answer, because I was already watching the second miracle unfold. The planet Madron IV, a Concord colony known for agricultural exports and antique calendar festivals, had gone offline 30 minutes earlier. Panic was expected, but it didn't come. Instead, an entire fleet of unmarked vessels emerged from a deep orbit shelf. No call signs, no IDs, just sleek hulls and impossible trajectory curves. They weren't from any Senate record. Earth had sent evacuation ships, not asked, not announced, just acted. We watched the evacuation unfold through angled projections. Families ushered into corridors, Stabilized reactors pushed into safe cycles, exit patterns regulated without confusion. Not a single ship collided. Not one missed departure. They weren't military vessels, but they moved like they drilled it 1,000 times in silence. "Where are these craft listed?" Talvek demanded, gesturing wildly. "This must be illegal deployment. Who gave them permission to what?" I cut in. "To save your citizens before your committee finished naming the emergency." The room stilled. Outside, 2 more systems lost contact and were saved. The feeds flooded with anonymized logs, voice lines from Earth's emergency AI assistants, coordinating with local infrastructure. Short commands. No greetings. No delays. Corridor 2 stabilized. Begin loading cycle. System heat stabilized. Reactor suppression in progress. Civilian extraction complete. Final ship departing in 97 seconds. Every word made the Senate feel smaller. They hadn't even voted yet, and Earth had already deployed the rescue. I turned to Council Chair Lex. "You have your answer. They were never absent. They've been operating under your noses while you debated terms of engagement." Lex didn't respond. His screen had just gone white. So had mine. So had everyone's. The laser plasma displays across the Senate hall flickered, then aligned into perfect uniformity. A blank, clean field. 4 words appeared in the center. Black text, steady pulse. "We never left. You just never looked where it mattered." No sender, no timestamp, no fanfare, just the truth, written plainly, like the final page of a history book. No one knew they were inside. Talvek's mouth moved, but no sound came. Councilor Dren sank into his seat. Even Vorian, steady as orbit, lowered his gaze. The Earth seat, empty still, seemed to watch us now. Not as an invitation, as a mirror, not of power, of failure. Outside, somewhere beyond the Veil Rings, black flag command ships repositioned, silent, coordinated, ruthless. Inside, the Senate prepared another vote, but this time no one believed the vote would matter. There was no war declaration, just motion, fast, fluid, terrifying in its certainty. The Void Collective struck like ink poured into water, wide, cold, spreading before anyone could say mobilize. Systems across the Concord lit up in every direction. Laser plasma feeds blazed with alerts. Fleet routes blinked offline. Planetary comms cut mid-transmission. The Senate chamber filled with scrambling aides and fraying tempers. Half the delegates yelled for protocol enforcement. The other half demanded emergency override. Talvek was already proposing a joint vote. He just couldn't decide which committee should draft it first. Meanwhile, the displays told a quieter, crueler story. Senate defense lines were collapsing. Ships designed for patrol, not survival, folded within minutes of contact. Coordinated resistance was impossible. Most fleets operated on aging doctrine, unable to respond to multi-vector assaults with no command hierarchy. "Where's our reinforcement grid?" Vorian barked to no one in particular. "Reassigned 2 cycles ago," someone replied, flipping through comm layers. Still in refit rotation, I stared at the screens. Numb, planets weren't being destroyed. They were being silenced, cut off, eclipsed, like someone had thrown a cloth over them and whispered, "Not yours anymore." And then the collective signal scatter shifted. Not incoming attacks, reactions. The enemy was pulling back, or rather being pushed. A new visual layer appeared on the main display. Ships, not Senate, not labeled. They didn't arrive via traditional jump points. No flash of re-entry, no corridor trails. They just stepped into place. Black flag fleets anchoring reality itself around them. No broadcasts, no hails, no introduction. Just a symbol on their hulls, a single white ring on black alloy. Earth had arrived. A battle group emerged over Thren Vallis, a scientific world with no orbital defense. Before Void forces could collapse its orbital lanes, Earth's vanguard fired 7 spatial anchors in unison, freezing half the invasion fleet inside a folded sphere of space. The other half vanished beneath plasma trails, shaped like bone fractures. I watched the feed update, enemy numbers thinning without explosive excess, just gone, disassembled, like their aggression had been unwritten. Above the Tauridine arc, the same, another fleet appeared, not from hyperspace lanes, but anchored slip folds, pre-planned weeks in advance. and held in reserve just outside known detection grids. Their arrival was so clean it felt rehearsed. It had been. Inside Echo Vault 9, they'd practiced this war 10,000 times. And now Commander Drace Halvan was playing it note for note. Halvan's eyes were ice on fire, cold focus, bright with velocity. Execute Shadow Path 2. His bridge crew responded instantly. They weren't shouting, they weren't asking, they were executing. A void cruiser attempted a flank maneuver, its wings shifting through fluid dimensions. Halvan's reply, a gravitational lens sweep from 3 auxiliary crafts positioned at non-Euclidean angles. The enemy vessel folded in on itself, collapsing into a singular streak of invisible noise. Status, 0 losses, said his tactical officer. 8 confirmed removals. Redirect Group Delta. Run Spear Cascade on their jump core arrays. I want them blind, not dead. Understood. This wasn't combat. This was an extraction. Back in the Senate, chaos looked up from its paperwork. The displays, once screaming in red, now blinked green and gray. Intercept routes. Blockades forming around critical worlds. Concord systems being defended, but not by Concord. Council Leader Coven turned sharply as the main entrance hissed open. He didn't recognize the man who entered, but the uniform did the talking. Dark, clean, unadorned, except for the band on his collar and the signature white ring stitched at the sleeve. Admiral Corvin Rail, who sent for you? Talvek demanded, voice cracking with outrage. No one, Rail said. You were too busy filing motions. He walked past Talvek without a glance and stepped onto the command platform. We are assuming control of all major defensive operations within Concord space. There was a silence thick enough to make time hesitate. You have no jurisdiction, Talvek insisted. And yet, Rail replied, turning slightly, we've already saved 3 of your systems while you debated punctuation. Coven stepped forward. What do you need? Full access to planetary tracking relays, your fleet routing archives, civilian population density maps, and an end to interspecies policy vetting for the next 48 hours. You're asking us to suspend our entire chain of command. I'm not asking. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The room understood the difference between invitation and instruction. By nightfall rotation, 3 more Concord worlds had been secured. 1 had been under siege for 2 days. Earth's asymmetric insertion teams disabled the Void Siege Array in 23 minutes. The second never saw a shot fired. Quantum code locks deployed from a station buried under a moon base, scrambled the enemy's targeting logic until they withdrew out of self-preservation. The third, Commander Halvan's fleet herded them into an orbit around an abandoned star, then collapsed the pathing field, trapping them in a non-linear time loop. They wouldn't even realize they'd lost until they tried to leave, and failed. Back in the chamber, the Council updated the war board again. Now where there had been color-coded system names, there were designations the Senate didn't recognize. Gatewatch 7 Lattice Redfield Obsidian Relay North, each labeled organized and completely outside Senate registry. The white ring symbol blinked softly at the bottom of every feed. No anthem, no speech, no celebration, just movement, exact, silent, relentless. Earth wasn't here to win the war. They were here to finish what everyone else hadn't seen coming. And I, Envoy Vekron Das, no longer wondered why their seat had remained empty. It was never absence. It was instruction. The Void Collective didn't retreat. They reformed, like shattered glass remembering its shape. Out past the Cauldra Spiral, their remnant fleets converged into tight spearhead formations, 3-dimensional vectors knotted into gravitational slipstreams. They weren't aiming for border colonies anymore. They were coming for the Senate's heart world, the central core of Concord civilization, seat of diplomacy, beacon of unity. Ironically, also the least prepared planet in the galaxy to defend itself. Senate fleet scrambled, half in chaos, half in denial. The chamber's feeds twisted with chatter and cross signals. Emergency mobilizations jammed the comms. Some worlds tried to deploy diplomatic probes. One senator actually proposed negotiation, mid-assault. I watched it all from my upper gallery seat, arms folded, the backlight from my heads-up display bleeding soft lines across my uniform. They don't get it, I muttered. No, said a voice beside me, low and even. But they're about to. Director Marin Kess sat without fanfare, coat draped over one arm, eyes locked on the real-time laser plasma display hovering in front of us. He hadn't left Echo Vault 9, he just brought it with him. The projection shifted, a translucent map of incoming void formations, each vector crawling toward the inner Concord loop like a spider drawn to warmth. Kess tapped once, the overlay updated. They weren't alone. Black flag fleets, Earth's unnamed warships were already there, not converging, not intercepting, waiting. From above the gravity wells of Senatalis Prime, Earth's command ships flickered into layered orbital tiers, not concentric rings, not defensive walls, a sphere. 63 ships, each anchored at spatial fracture points plotted years prior, formed an irregular pattern around the incoming void sphere. I recognized it before the feed even labeled it. The silence net, I whispered. Instructor Rendell Vox's theoretical doctrine, once considered too ambitious, too risky. A full-spectrum spacefold trap designed not to destroy an enemy, but erase their orientation. Inside the void fleet, chaos bloomed. Their command vessels veered subtly off course. Sensors cross-fed false feedback loops. Pathing logic bent mid-cycle. Half their units realigned to evade a threat that hadn't moved. The rest tried to fire only to watch their targeting interfaces show themselves as the threat. That's the maneuver Earth ran on our own ghost fleets during training, I said aloud. Kess nodded. Difference is this time we let it complete. On the central feed, the Void Collective spear began to splinter. Not from fire, not from damage, from confusion. Ships bled formation. 2 vanished into open folds, redirected, not destroyed. A third appeared to reverse direction, caught in a temporal snare that sent it flickering through the same path 6 times in one breath. I thought Earth believed in defensive containment, I said. They do, Kess replied. But sometimes containment requires removing the ability to move. Senate systems lit up with new feeds, not from Earth, from independent monitoring stations scattered across neutral zones. Each recorded footage from angles never before accessible, clearly pre-synced. The Void Collective wasn't being overwhelmed. They were being understood. In one sector, Earth deployed decoy systems that mimicked civilian outposts. When the void closed in, the constructs collapsed into quantum cages, trapping half their ships in a folded dimension with no exit parameters. Another fleet tried to break orbit above Ultravax Minor. They succeeded until Earth ships fired null-code interceptors, deprogramming the vessel's inertial command. They didn't explode. They simply stopped responding. And through all of it, no Earth vessel bore a flag. Not one carried a national marker. No anthem, no broadcasted claim. Just the white ring, quietly embedded against black. Inside the Senate, the absurdity cracked under its own weight. Representative Talvik stood frozen, arms half raised mid-argument. Aides had stopped typing. For the first time in memory, nobody had anything to propose. And then the request came. A Senate transmission, routed through emergency diplomatic bands, flagged high priority. Request Earth strategic collaboration, formal delegation to arrive within 1 hour, full coordination desired. Kess read it once, then flicked the message aside. No, he said. Just like that, we're not declining. The response was already transmitting. Observe and document. This is not your fight yet. Outside, above the final orbital shell of Concord's inner cradle, the Void Collective's lead vessel emerged, a cluster of layered geometry folded inward, its structure resembling a mineral fractal frozen mid-formation. It aimed straight for the Senate, and met silence, not absence, design. Earth's command ships formed the final closure, sealing the 3D sphere around the fractal ship. Inside, every movement created distortion. Every attempt to scan triggered false depth. Engines twisted space-time in reverse. Communications pinged inward. And then, it fractured. Not shattered. Not burned. Unwound. A ripple passed through the spatial layer, like threads pulled from fabric, light bent sideways. Sound vanished from local sensors, and the ship that had once pulsed with void intelligence began dissolving, not into debris, but into incomprehensibility. The display faded. Silence returned. No announcement. No celebration. No surrender. Only confirmation. The war had ended, and no one cheered, because Earth didn't give them a reason to. They just turned off the trap and left the remnants to drift, catalogued, cornered, and no longer a threat. I sat back in my seat, the projection dimming, the white ring now floating alone. They hadn't saved us. They'd simply executed what they'd prepared for. And somehow that was far more terrifying and far more comforting. 3 days after the last Void fleet blinked from the boards, the Senate reconvened in full session. Not emergency status, not closed quorum, full session. Because apparently, formality must be preserved even after reality has been turned inside out and quietly restructured by a species you spent 300 years politely ignoring. The chamber glowed with polished calm. Fresh banners had been draped over the entry columns. New security nodes blinked softly behind ornamental panels. The scent of disinfectant lingered faintly. Someone had clearly ordered a deep cleanse after the evacuation panic. Even the heads-up displays had been reset, tabs closed, data cleared. The only thing that hadn't changed, Earth's seat, still there, still untouched, still empty. Council leader Stroll Coven stood at the center, his posture just a little straighter than usual, his hands clasped with the weight of things unspoken. His voice, however, was as deliberate as ever. Let the record reflect that Earth's intervention halted the Void collective incursion at all Concord front lines, secured 32 endangered systems, and disabled the threat without initiating interstellar collapse. He paused, a longer silence than protocol demanded. Then this chamber owes its continued existence to the actions of those who were never seated here. The words rippled through the air like a breeze finding its voice in a room that didn't know it had windows. I glanced toward the Earth seat. Still nothing, no envoy, no transmission, just that same quiet dark panel, polished but unclaimed. Council Chair Vorian Lex stepped forward. After deliberation with remaining High Command delegates, he said, "We propose a formal amendment to Article 12, Section 3, creation of a permanent Earth Command liaison, with strategic authorization privileges equal to any council member." He tapped his console, and the proposed amendment appeared in the center projection, outlined in soft blue light. It was clean, respectful, overdue by several centuries, and still too late. The doors at the rear of the chamber parted, not with ceremony, just a single step. Ambassador Alric Thorne entered without escort, without fanfare, and without expression. His coat hung loosely, travel-worn. His boots were scuffed with asteroid dust. His presence, however, didn't walk in, it settled. Like an answer someone had feared hearing out loud. He stopped just short of the empty seat. Councillor Lex Thorne began, voice smooth and unreadable. "We appreciate the sentiment." He didn't sit, didn't approach, didn't glance at the display. "But our seat was never a request for inclusion," he continued. "It was a mirror. We left it open to see when you'd stop looking at it and start asking why it remained." Gasps? No, that would imply surprise. Most delegates just shifted uncomfortably, realizing for the first time that absence can, in fact, be a lesson. Thorne stepped down from the platform and turned to leave. Vorian spoke up, hesitating. "Will Earth remain present?" Thorne paused, gaze flicking to the chamber once. "We'll remain where we always were," he said, "watching, listening, acting when necessary." He stopped beside my seat as he passed. His voice lowered just enough for me to hear. "Some of you were ready," he murmured. "You especially." I stood. "Not from obligation, from understanding." "Earth doesn't need a seat," I said, my voice carrying across the chamber. "They already built the room, we didn't realize we were inside." The chamber stilled. Some delegates looked uncertain. Others nodded slowly, like they just spotted the frame around a painting they thought had no edges. Later I received access to the final Concord Earth transmission. No diplomatic flourish, no anthem, just a short file embedded in a compressed relay packet. Quantum channel 417K is active. Use only in verified extinction level emergencies. That was it. No signature, no welcome, just readiness. By end of cycle, Earth's fleets began to vanish. Not withdraw, vanish. Some folded into low orbits behind radiation-heavy moons, undetectable to basic scans. Others were spotted only once, silhouetted against cold stars, then gone before trajectory could be calculated. The public never saw them leave. The Senate didn't announce it, but the Council knew. Because Earth's quietest message came not through words, but subtraction. They were gone, and everything was still standing. Weeks passed, trade resumed, Council sessions returned to debates about cargo taxes and wormhole tariffs. Talvik stopped speaking entirely. He'd lost more than political ground during the war. He'd lost the illusion that process was equivalent to action. Meanwhile, a new protocol was added to every emergency briefing binder across the Concord. If all options are exhausted and planetary defense grids fail, initiate Signal 4R Earth Override Contingency. Only one entity could activate it. Only Earth could respond. No one knew how long it would take, but no one doubted they'd come. On my final day as a diplomatic envoy, I returned to the chamber one last time. The seat was still there, still empty, but now, it felt different. Not abandoned, not symbolic, guarded, not by soldiers, by memory. Just before I left, I received one last message, time-stamped, untraceable, logged through a secure channel no one else could access. It was from Thorn, a single line. We don't guard the galaxy because we want to. We do it because we saw what happens when no one does. I looked at the seat, smiled, and walked away. Some lessons don't need to be repeated, and some seats never needed to be filled. They just needed to be understood.